Before we get started extending our application to support property and method exports, let's take a quick look back at the existing application we've been utilizing so we just remember what it was doing. This application, if I click load, will basically load up all plugins that we find on disk and display them in our list box. This works out pretty well, but what I'd like to do is extend this a bit so that we can load methods and properties into our application at runtime. For the example we're going to give today is we're going to have a logger class. And our application is going to have a built-in default logger that will do something, a log to the console, let's say. But I want to add the ability to log to other destinations, and I want to be able to say that, if I'm a log debug, log here, if I'm a log message, log here. But I'd like to be able to do this by providing an external assembly via plugin and have MEF pick up the method and property exports that I may provide. To do this, to get started, what I need to do is create a class called logger. And my logger class is going to contain two properties. Now you'll notice that these two properties are being, have a return type of a delegate, of an action of string. You'll notice that these two properties I provide, log debug and log error, are properties that return a delegate. They return action of string or action of string with exception. The reason for this is that MEF, when you export methods, will import them as delegates into your class. This is the way it works. So now that I've created my class that will hold my imports and exports, what I need to do to mark up this class so that MEF understands what it is. I need to tell it to export. I'm going to go ahead and tell it's a type of logger. I need to come down here and tell these are imports and type of logger as well, or type of action of string. And we're going to go ahead and tell it that to allow recomposition. Let's do this down here. So I've now set up my imports so that I can import a method into this class. Next thing I want to go about doing is I want to go ahead and create a default logger. To save some time, I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste this in. So I've pasted my default logger, and as you can see, it's pretty straightforward. Just has a method called log_as_debug and a method called log_as_error. Now, because this inherits off of logger, what we want to do within our constructor is say that log_debug delegate is actually being implemented by log_as_debug, my method. And the same thing for log_as_error. So that's my default logger. How do I go about creating my logger that will be injected at runtime? For that, I need to come over to my console logger. And I've already taken the time to create this for us. It's pretty straightforward. I've already got a log_debug and log_error methods, and I could name these Sam and Fred for all I care. What's important is this export signature here. This is what's going to tell us to import or export these as a delegate action that takes a string, and that will tell MEF to place them in my imports that's looking for an action of string. So I've created my console logger, which is going to be utilize MEF. Now I need to set up my plugin manager so I can actually return that logger. Now I don't need to do anything special to my composition setup. That's already done, taken care of. MEF will work just fine with the current code. What I want to do now is actually create my logger. Again, to save some time, I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste this in. Again, to save some time, I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste this in. Let's take a look at what I'm doing here. So I've created a property called logger. And the first thing it'll try to do is try to get an exported value, or the default, of type logger. So basically, you're going to reach into the container and say, do I have something that's of type logger? If it cannot find the value, it will try to return the default. In our scenario here, the default will be null. So we're going to perform this null check here and say that if you're null, go ahead and return the default. If you're not null, go ahead and return the regular logger. So that should do it in terms of setup work to get our composition working. So let's go ahead and make sure we don't have any of our console logger plugins put into our plugin folder. And I can look at our plugins folder and I can tell you that we don't have anything. So let's go ahead and launch our application. When I click load, I'll actually be presented with the line here, logger.logdebug. I want to go ahead and put a breakpoint here and hit F5. And I'm going to step over this. And when I step over this, you'll see that it's provided to me as a null value. That is because the container does not understand what logger is, so it has to provide me a null. If I continue to run over this and look down in the output window, you'll see that it says the default logger was used. And then above that I get a message from MEF. This is some diagnostics capability of MEF, telling me that there were no exports found. So in our scenario here, nothing was found, but we continued to use our default logger. Now let's go ahead and add in to our plugin folder our console logger and rerun the same code. I'm not going to stop the application. So I'm going to go ahead and paste in our console logger, and I'm going to rerun our application again. This time when I step over logger, you'll see that it's actually populated, which means I'm not going to use the default logger. And if I look down in the window, you'll see that I'm now using my console logger to perform my logging actions. That's pretty cool. So now I'm using a method export via MEF to swap out what method's actually being run at runtime. So that's pretty cool, but we do want to take a look at one thing. In our logger class, we're trying to import an action of string. What if I do this? Should probably stop the application first. What if I want to create a new method here called logMessage that also takes an action of string? And let's go ahead and come down and fill this out so it's being used everywhere. And then finally I need to come over to my console logger and do the same thing. So I now have two methods being exported that have the same signature. I'm trying to import them into two different methods. How's it going to know which one to use? That's going to be interesting. Now if I leave this as is and rerun the application, first remembering to put in the appropriate new DLLs into my plugin folder, and first remember to put the new DLLs into my plugins folder. So if I run this, let's see what happens now. I'm going to step over this, and this time I get a null in my logger. And if I look down on my output window, it'll tell me that more than one export matches the constraint. So what this tells me is I can't have two imports or exports that have the exact same signature unless I want to provide them names. So let's go ahead and provide these names real quick. I'll provide this logging.debug and this one logging.name, and I'll come over here and do the same thing. recompile my application. We need to make sure we drop the new assemblies into my plugin folder again real quick. And I'll do that. So let's run the app again and try it again. I now don't have a null, I actually have my real logger. And if I step through, I get my same message in my console that I expected and that I got last time. So that's how I go ahead and export methods, and I give them names. So how do we go about exporting properties? Properties are pretty straightforward. They work pretty much the exact same way as a method. So I'm going to go ahead and create a property here. I'm going to call this a string. And I need to give this an import. It's a type of string. And I'd also want to give this a name too, just to prevent, again, some conflicts. Let's go and switch this to a backing field, and I'll just provide this a name here. What we really want to illustrate here is that we can export a property. So I need to come back to my console logger, provide it a name, and give it an export as well. Make sure we name it appropriately and tell it's a type of string. And we don't care about the setter on this, so let's go ahead and make this just return console. And now if I recompile this, drop in my new plugin, and rerun my application, I should be able to see my property export as well. So apply our new plugins, run our application. So let's go ahead and click load. Step into this, step over logger, have a logger. So let's go into our media window, hit logger.name, and you'll see that I have the name of console. That tells me that not only did it export my property or my methods, but also is able to export my properties as well. I can run this and let it go as usual. So there you have it. In a short few minutes, we've taken a look at how we can set up MEF to export not only properties but methods as well. And we've taken a quick look at how, if you have multiple exports in the property or method level that have the same signature, it's probably in your best interest to provide a name in order to provide conflicts. So I hope you learned something. Until next time.